Hello children, let us discuss the another very important segment of social science of class 9, that is the history. In your history you have a three unit, and in your first unit there is a chapter, and the title of the chapter is French Revolution. So today, with the help of this slide and the video explanation, I will try to make you understand, or I will explain you about the French Revolution. If you see the French Revolution, it is very important in the perspectives of history of the world, not only in the French, because the French Revolution has a huge contribution to the entire world in this contemporary era. But before going to start about the chapter, let me tell you the main objectives of the chapter. After discussing this chapter, you will come to know about the monarchical form of government that was existing in the French and how it's come to its end. That is, again, another important outcome or objectives of the chapter is the divisions of the French society. And there were certain group of people who just exercised or enjoy various privileges, and some group of people they did not exercise or enjoy any privileges. How or what kind of privileges they enjoyed and how such privileges were come to end, that also the chapter is discussing. Another, it talks about the different rights of the people before and after the revolution. Do you know, after discussing the chapter today, in the democratic form of government, you come to know about the various rights and liberties and the opportunities. Many of these rights, liberties, and the opportunities, they were the outcome product of the French Revolution. That's why, in the perspective of these all rights and liberties and the different forms of government, this chapter is very important. But before going to explain you about the chapter, I have prepared the timeline of this chapter. Why I am giving this timeline at the very initial of the chapter, so that if you have read the chapter in your home, staying in your home, then this timeline will surely give you some idea to understand that what you have studied or what you have read. Not only that, if you go through the timelines just once, it will give you an idea how to prepare. And along with that, when we will discuss the later part of the chapter in the next slides, then it will be little easier for you to understand. So let us see. I have prepared the timeline in this way. You might have you might have going through these slides. First, I have kept that 1770 to 1780, this period. 1770 to 1780, in this particular period we will find the French faced the economic decline. It means it faced the economic crisis, because of which the French government sank in deep debt. This is one of the important point. Another, 1788 to 1789, this period there was a very bad harvest due to natural phenomena, or you can say that some of the other negligence of the government. As a result, there was a very poor supply of food items in the market, and this lead to the high prices of all the fooding items, and that cause for the food riots, means people were struggling, they were fighting to get their three times bread and butter. 1789 May 5, see, States General convened demands and reform. Do you know, this State General was formed, and they have demanded to reform in the various existing system of laws and the privileges that was existed in the French during those period. And it's happened on when? That is on May 5, 1789. Afterwards, you might have seen 1789 July 14. National Assembly was formed. Now, who was that? This National Assembly we will discuss later. National Assembly was formed, and they stormed the Bastille, and the French Revolution begins. So it means in this particular chapter, the 14th July 1789 is a very important date because since then the revolution start in the French. 1789 August 4, end of the right of aristocracy. Now aristocracy means those privileged class, or you can say that is privileged classes form of government who exercise the limitless privileges in the French society that was come to an end. 1789 August 26, Declaration of Right of the Man. It means lots of reforms were taken, and so many rights which were existing in the old time in the French, that has so many changes brought in all those rights of the people. Now 1790, civil constitution of the clergy nationalized the church. It means the clergy, so called the upper states of the French, no, their privileges, their whatever the with whatever privileges they were living, that also got reformed. It means it was nationalized. Okay, about which we will discuss in later in series. 1792, Constitution of 1791 converts, means what constitution was there in the French in the 1791 that was reformed, and then we can see that French it turns from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy. Okay, now what is absolute monarchy? What is constitutional monarchy? Absolute monarchy means where king exercise all the power without any restrictions. Now constitutional monarchy means some power of the king will decentralized among the people's representatives. This is the difference between absolute monarchy and constitutional monarchy. Now 1792, Austria and Prussia attacked revolutionary of French. Why they attacked this we will discuss later part. 1793, Louis XVI and Maria Antoinette, she was the wife of Louis XVI, were executed. They were killed. 1793 to 94, it was also described as the sign of terror in the history of French. Now see the Austria, in the same year Austria, Britain, Netherlands, Prussia, Spain started war with the French. The Robespierre Committee of Public Safety repels back, and the foreign invaders were executed. So this after that what happened, we will see the directory rule and the rise of Napoleon in the French, in the history of French. So this is one timeline just I have prepared before explaining the chapter, just to give a little glimpse, and so that you can have a little idea that how the things were happening in the French. But one big note to understand here, as we know that the 14th July 1789, the revolution in the French has begun. But why this revolution begins? It is very, very important to understand. There are some reasons because of which people protest, because of which people oppose. So let us try to understand what happened in the past which lead for the revolution. So to understand that, we need to see that how the French society were structured, what was the governing system of the French, and many aspects of the society and the government. So first we will try to understand what was the social structure of the French before the revolution. If you see the 18th century French, then you will find that the French society was divided into two classes, that is called privileged and unprivileged class. Now see, in privileged class, some group of people, so called clergy and nobility, they comes. Now this clergy were also called as a first state, nobility were also called as a second state, and The common men, they were called as a third states. Okay. Now, who all come in the clergy? In the clergy, the royal family and the close relatives. No, they comes. They were treated as what? The privileged class. As I already told you. And in second, the nobility. Nobility were all the ministers and the high designated persons in the court of ministers. And thirdly, the common people. Now these common peoples were consist of big businessmen, merchants, court officials, lawyers, teachers, doctors, peasants, lenders, laborers, and the other departmental servant. So if you see, this is how in the late 18th century the French society was divided. There was a division of French society, and in these divisions, uh, during such time when the society was structured in this way, the Louis XVI has ascended the throne of French. Now, in 1774, when Louis XVI ascended the throne of French, he has found that the French treasury was empty. It means the French treasury was bankrupted. It was struggling with the financial crisis or economic crisis. Now, why France was facing this economic crisis? Some points were there. If you studied in the previous classes, then you might have come to know that the French has introduced many of its colonies in different part of the world, as the French was one of the imperialist nation of that period of time. In that process of acquiring the colonies in other part of the country, the French has made a huge expenses before Louis XVI ascended the throne of French as a king. And when he ascended, because of that factor, as the previous king to introduce their colonies, they have made a huge expenses. As a result, there was a financial crisis. The government of French, they find a financial crisis. This is one aspect. Another aspect, you see, when Louis XVI ascended the throne, at the time, what he did, he also did the same thing. What he did, he supported the America to get its 13 colonies free from the control of Britain, in which he spent a huge amount of money. And why French has supported the American? Because the Britain was the bitter or very tough competitor or enemy of French, you can say. And another, that is extravagant expenses of the immense palace of Versailles maintenance made more uh, crisis, means lots of money was spent to maintain and look after the palace of Versailles. It means whoever are the living, including them. So all these cases, when the French, which was already struggling with the economic crisis, again in such case giving support to the America to free their colonies from the control of Britain, again that unwanted expenses which is done to maintain the place of Versailles and the people living there, raise this economic crisis or the burden of financial crisis on the French treasury. And as a reason to overcome this financial crisis, they left with one option only. They should increase the state earning. And in those days, how they were able to increase the state earning? What was the source of state earning? The source of state earnings were only the revenue, the taxes. So to meet this financial crisis, the Louis XVI, what he did, he thought of increasing the the tax of the tax on the people and on their uh, different sphere. Now see, Those particular period of time in the French uh, in 18th century, when the feudal system was brought in execution. It means the feudal system was existing in the French when this Louis XVI was in power. Now, what is this feudal system? Feudal system means the people, they don't have their control over their over the resources of the country, because of which now all the people living in the French, they started to compare the Louis XVI governance with the old regime. Now, what is old regime? Old regime was the rule of Bourbons in the French. That was called as what? Old regime. So this is the conditions. Now see, uh, as the burden of the taxes were increased, and there was the feudal system was in executions, this made people's life very tough. As a result, every people living in the French, now they were struggling to survive. There were some more reasons what made people life tough in the French. Let us compare the French uh, since 1715 to 1789. If you see the population of French in 1715, it was 23 million, and if you compare it with the 1789, it was 28 million. Now, this lead, there is a lead in the population, or there is a grow in population one side. Now say this population growth also increases the demand of food grains, but in another side, the French, no, as because of this feudal system, all the land or the agriculture's land were not able to agriculture by these peasants, because most of this agriculture's land were under the control of either clergy or the nobles. So one side population is growing, another side the rate of production is very low, as the most of the productive land are in the control of nobilities. In such conditions, what happened? France has gone through another hard time. That is, the French was hit by drought. This led to subsistence crisis, population growth, feudal system, and the French was hit by the drought. Now these three factors, what it did, it led to subsistence crisis. Now what is the meaning of subsistence crisis? As you may be reading here, it is a condition in which basic need of livelihood were in endangered. People fail to fulfill the basic needs. And basically, what are the basic needs in the context of that time? It's surely food, cloth, and shelter. Today, the meaning or its content or concept is changed. Today, so many other things comes in the basic needs. But if you compare or if you study about the basic needs of the people in the then period, then these three are the most important aspect. Now see, as the production was less, the prices of all the fooding items or the food stuff in the market, it's started to growing higher. As a result, the people who were living with the limited earning, for them it was very difficult to manage their livelihood. And we should not forget, as I told, that there were many people who were living under the burden of taxes. So it means, with this we can understand that the conditions of peasants and the common man in the French was very hard. It was not easy for them to survive. Let us see the condition of worker. And to come over this, to meet the livelihood of the people and other requirement of the people. Many of the factories and the industries, they engage its worker for the long working hours, but in compared to that, they were not paid equally. It means their working hours were increased to meet this crisis, but in another hand, their salary were not increased. They were not given safety environment for work. They were not given other basic facilities. In this way, if you see the life of the people in the French during the Louis XVI rules become very tough. Now, up to here, what we have understand, um, the Louis XVI has ascended the throne. We have understand the nature of the French society. They were divided into a privileged and unprivileged class, and this privileged class were exercising or enjoying all the facilities. They were exempted from paying tax. Only the unprivileged class were paying tax. They were only the taxpayers, and ultimately another there was a uh, decline in the agriculture's production, because of which the price of all the fooding items rose up. As a result, the many of the common people living in the French, they failed to fulfill their basic needs or basic requirements, and in such case, the feudal system was in existence, and how the worker conditions become miserable to meet all the livelihood of the people. In such case, when there was a lots of hard experiences for the people, now we can see there was a emergence of one new class, that is called middle class. Now when this middle class emerged, okay, they they are coming from different social groups, and it happened in the 18th century. The different social groups who emerged in the French during the 18th century, they were called as what, middle class. Now who are this middle class? Basically, they were also from the third state, unprivileged class. But who were they? Let us try to see. As I told you in the first slide, let us go there to see once. If you see that common people, the big businessmen, merchants, no, the court officials, lawyers, peasants, and the artisans, they were what? They were the third state, and they were coming from different social groups. Now these groups, they constitute what? Middle class, and they emerge as a middle class. Why? These were those traders and manufacturers who did woolen and silk export and import business with other countries, and they were, if you compare this group of people with the rest of the third states people, then you will come to know that they were economically little established. This is one aspect. Another, this group of peoples, as they were a highly educated class, they constitute not only the your manufacturers and the traders, they were the lawyers, they were the administrative officials. No, they now started to demand the equal privileges to all the social groups, and they demand to abolish the privilege based on birth. Why? Why they made such demand? There are certain factors. As I told you, this group of people were highly educated. They were called as the elite group of the French. They were highly educated, and they get inspired by the many philosophers whom they read. And these philosophers, they talks about the different form of a garment. Let us take the example of some philosophers. As you have seen that John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Montesquieu. Now Montesquieu, these were some of the thinkers the philosophers, who have expressed their idea about the government and its system of governance. And what the John Locke said in his True Treaty of Government, he advocated such a government which should refute the doctrine of divine and absolute right of monarch. If you see the Rousseau's, he said that the government is a contract, it is a social contract between people and their representatives. If you see the Montesquieu, he said that the power of the government should be decentralized among its various body or the organ. It means the power should not remain in the hand of one person. So this educated class, no, they get influence with the idea of these thinkers or the philosophers, and ultimately they started to discuss about this in the different coffee houses, and they started to read out the slogans among the masses, and ultimately they were assimilating the people, and they were demanding to end all sorts of privileges that is prevailing in the French by birth. Okay, this is how the things are getting changed. When this series of things are happening, division of society, survival, struggle to survive, emergence of this middle class, this ultimately lead France towards the revolution. And why revolution was broke out? The certain factors as discussed in the previous. The increase in the tax by the Louis XVI to get to meet his financial crisis made people unhappy. There were lots of problems existing in the society because of many factors. These were drought, these were feudal system, these were classifying some group of the people and declaring them as an unprivileged class, and putting or loading them with the old burden of taxes. This made people unhappy. Now ultimately what happened, when the thought of increasing the tax Louis XVI, the people started to compare. In the old regime, it means in the Bourbons dynastic rule before Louis XVI, no, the monarch did not have the power to increase the tax in the same manner Louis XVI. Monarch did not have the power to increase the tax by himself. In the same manner, what happened, as in the old regime, all the representatives from all the states the monarch used to call, and with their consent they used to increase the tax. In the same reason, Louis XVI also called an assembly of all the states together. The first, second states sent 300 representatives in that assembly, and the third state they sent 600 representatives. And we should not forget, they were most prosperous and educated member of the society. Now Louis XVI was determined to continue the same practice what the old regime was carrying forward, but at this time third state demanded to conduct a voting where each member have one vote right. It means he said that if Louis XVI want to increase the tax, there should be a voting, and in that voting each member of the assembly should give a voting right. Now this idea was rejected by Louis XVI, and when this demand of third state was rejected by Louis XVI, they walk out from the hall. And ultimately on 20 June 1789, third state assembled in the hall of Versailles, declaring themselves as a general assembly and sworn not to disperse till drafting constitution for French. Now this is how you see, as I told you, the how national assembly, what is General Assembly. In the first timeline we have seen, so General Assembly is what? General Assembly is nothing but they were the representatives of the third state who walk out from the hall of hall of Versailles, where they were called to discuss about the increase of the taxes, and ultimately when they place forward the demand of conducting a vote, and each member of the assembly should given a voting right, and in this case the Louis XVI has rejected to accept the proposal given by the this third state. Ultimately what happened, these third state people, they walk out from the hall and they assembled in the hall of Versailles, declaring them as themselves as what? General Assembly. They have taken an oath, until they will not draft the constitution for French, they are not going to disperse, they are not going to remove. And this is what the beginning of the French Revolution. Now another point you see, now General Assembly was led by Mirbe, who was born in a noble family, who was convinced with the idea of abolishing feudal system and gave powerful speech to the crowd. If you see the Mirbe, he too was from the noble family, but he was not in support of feudal system. Another is Abbe Sieyès. Now he was a priest who wrote an influential pamphlet called What is the Third State? This, in this way things were going, and when all these things were in process, ultimately what happened? The French hit with the drought. Ultimately there was a bad harvest, which consequences for the rose in the price of food grains. Things were not available, hence shops were stormed at the same. Shops were stormed, they were looted down. At the same time, the king ordered the troop to move into the Paris, which angered the people, and they destroyed the Bastille on 14th July 1789. Now, when such things were developing in the cities of Paris, now the rumors spread everywhere in countryside also that Manners had hired to destroy the ripened crop, caught the fringe of fear. Now who were Manners? Manners were the landlords. That such rumors were spread in the countryside also, these Manners were hiring the troop to destroy the ripened crop of the peasants, and ultimately there was lots of chores and confusions, and in the they also started to attract the various residences of the noble and looted them and burned the official documents. Finally, when all these things were happening in the different part of the French, whether it is the countryside, whether it is in the cities, so just going through all these bad happenings, which is not favorable for the Louis XVI, he thought that it is good for him to go with the negotiation with the General Assembly, and ultimately the Louis XVI, he ready to go with the negotiation with the General Assembly, and he accepted their demands. After that, what happened? The French turned into a constitutional monarchy from absolute monarchy. Now, what is absolute monarchy? As I told you very beginning, that state where the king concentrate or exercise all the power. And constitutional monarchy means when the power of the king is decentralized among some of its elected representatives. Now, when the French become a constitutional monarchy from absolute monarchy, then on 4th of August 1789, this assembly, General Assembly, first what they did, they abolished the feudal system and other privileges of the clergy and the nobles. As I told you, these nobles and the clergy, they were called as what, privileged class. They were free from burden of taxes, and they exercise limitless rights and liberties in the society. When General Assembly comes in power, and when French transform into a constitutional monarchy from absolute monarchy, first thing the General Assembly had done was what? It had ended the feudal system and the privileges of clergy and the nobles. Now, when French become a constitutional monarchy, then what were the things happened? Now, do you remember in the timeline we discussed about the 1791? Yes, the National Assembly drafted a constitution and it's declared French as a constitutional monarchy. Now, this assembly, which was indirectly elected, exercised the power to make law. Right? They were not directly elected. They were indirectly elected. Now, what they did, they started to make a law for the French. Now, National Assembly too did not give voting right to all the citizens. Now see the complexity of the French. With what uh, point this General Assembly, they were just fighting with the Louis XVI. But when they come in the power, they too deny to give all the people a voting right. Now what they did, they declared Frenchmen into two categories, that is active and passive citizen active and passive citizen status were given to the citizen. Now who were active citizens? Active citizens were those group of people who were basically male and completed the 25 years, the 25 years of age, and who are the taxpayer to the state. They had a voting right. It means to become an active citizens, one should be a man of 25 years. They should be a male. They should be a taxpayer. Now this group of people only exercise the voting right, and rest, like female who are female, male who are not taxpayer, this group of people, they were called as a passive citizens. Now these passive citizens were exempted from the voting rights. Now Constitution declare right of man, which includes right to life, freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, equality before law. These rights were established as a natural rights, that is, they belong to each human being by birth. Now what is the one big change we can see? We can see that the certain rights like right to life, right to speech, right to freedom of opinion, now right to equality before law, this was declared as a natural right, and these rights were given to all except one, that is voting right. So this is what the certain things the French it has done when it's become a constitutional monarch, okay, or monarchy. After that, the French abolishes monarchy and become a republic. Now the situation in the French was continued to be tense. It is not like that the moment the French become a republic, then it's not like that everything was okay. See the shift from absolute monarchy to constitutional monarchy. Now from constitutional monarchy to republic. But things were not as that much smooth, because though it's declared as a republic, but the situation was not peaceful. It was full of tense. Why? Because the greed of occupying or gaining back the power by the king Louis XVI was not completely um, end. It did not come to its end. That's why, to gain his lost status or the power, Louis XVI has entered with a secret negotiation with the king of Persia. Now, the Persia, the Austria, the Netherlands, these were some Spain, these were some countries which were not happy with all this development in the French, because they were in opinion such a development of transformation of monarchy to constitutional monarchy and constitutional monarchy to republic, which is ensuring various rights and liberties to its citizens, its people, will surely attract the people of their own country. That's why these neighboring countries of the French, they were not happy with the development of the French. And ultimately, what happened when Louis XVI entered in the secret negotiation with the king of Persia, they were ready to give them a help. Now, in the summer of 1789, they made a plan to send their troops to French to reestablish the monarch. And the why they made this plan, as I already told you, they were not happy with this development in the French. But before they could send their troop and they could do something to reestablish to Louis XVI, whole this plan was known to General Assembly, and they declare war on Persia and Austria in 1792. So there was a war in which French defeated both the Persia and the Austria. Thousands of people in French, they joined army voluntarily. They saw this war as a war between aristocracy, the king, and the people all over the Europe. Do you know, there was people's sentiment was so connected with this war. They started to compose, or they started to sing a patriotic song. They composed like Roger D. Ashley. He composed a song and started to sing a Marseillaise. Now the Marseillaise later declared as a national anthem of French. In the other hand, the continuous this participation in the war, and many people who joined this revolutionary movement, it has brought again economic losses, and there were lots of difficulties people face in the French. Why? Because majority of the population of French men, they get engaged in this revolutionary war. As a result, what happened? The agriculture's land left without production. So many factories and industries, they shut down. And again, we can see the economic instability, the shortage of food in the French. But in those days, when all the male of the French society, they were busy to keep themselves engaging in this historic war or revolutionary war, we can say, the woman took a or played an important role, and they took all the responsibilities of looking after their household work, agriculture's work, and fulfilling their daily livelihood. The woman also now started to earn for the family. Now, in this way, during this phase of time, some more interesting things and important things we can see that many clubs become an important place of political discussion. When this revolutionary war was going on all around the French and its neighboring countries, the many of the clubs now it's become an important place of political discussion. One among such them was a very popular was Jacobins, which got its name from the former convent of Saint Jacob in Paris. So this is how the series of things were happening in the French. Next to this, now let us try to understand this. Who were these Jacobins, or what was about the Jacobin clubs? It belongs to less prosperous section of the society, which include small shopkeepers, artisans, and daily wage workers. So, who were Jacobins? They were this group of people. The leader of these clubs was Maximilian Robespierre. Okay, they decided to wear long strip trousers to show the proclamation of power by the common man. Earlier, the French it has certain dress code which is called as a sumptuous laws. Now, what are these sumptuous laws? According to these sumptuous laws, there were certain conditions were imposed on the dress code also. All the people living in the French society, they were not allowed to wear all the types of dress. Like that, the up to the royal families and its member, they were only allowed to wear the long trousers, rest were not. So that's why when the Jacobins came in power, to show their proclamation, what they did, they started to wear a long strip trousers. The Jacobins came to be known as sans cloths. Literally means those without knee breeches, who were basically the nobles. In addition to that, they were wearing the red cap that symbolizes the liberty, freedom. Okay. Now, 10th August 1792, Jacobins stormed the palace of Tuileries and captured the king and the royal family. Later, assembly voted to imprison the royal family, and also voting rights were given to all the citizens regardless of any differences, which elected the assembly. Now, newly elected assembly called as the convention uh, on 21st September, and it abolished the monarchy and declared French as a republic. Now, on 21st of January 1793, Louis XVI was sentenced to death at the Palais de la Conduite on the charge of treason. Now, treason means the one who is betraying his country or the government. As we have seen, the Louis XVI he entered in the negotiations with the King of Persia very secretly. So see, these are series of development that is happening in French. Afterwards, when Jacobin comes in power and they did all these things and they transformed the uh, French into a republic state. But their era too was not that much sound as we can see. Do you know the period from 1793 to 1794 is referred as a reign of terror, when Jacobins, under the leadership of Maximilian Robespierre, came in power. They followed very harsh policy. As witness, they might have seen that in past how the monarchs they were just root out from the power or with that fear, and when they come in the power they have lots of challenges. One side, the now people, they were they become much more democratic in their thought. They exercise several rights. They started to criticize the government in their misdeeds. They started to express their opinion very freely. Now with that fear or with some other pressures, as they have seen that how the monarch were uprooted from the French, when the Jacobins comes in power, what they did, they followed very harsh policy, and those who opposed their rules, they were treating, or they were uh, suppressing them with very heavy hand. Those whoever are speaking or going against the Jacobins or the government, a very uh, painful punishments were given to them. Do you know, to establish their control and the rule in the French, they have introduced such a device also, which was used to execute those group of people who were criticizing the Robespierre. The Robespierre government issued the law placing maximum ceiling on wages and price. The price of all the commodities hike up. In other hand, peasants and the farmers were forced to sell their production to the government, that also in fixed price. Churches were shut down and converted into barracks and the offices. Robespierre Robespierre pursued his policy so relentlessly that even his supporters began to demand a moderation. Finally, in July 1794, Maximilien Robespierre too was arrested and sent to guillotine. Now, what is guillotine? That is a process by which the man is executed. The guillotine is named after his inventor names, Dr. Guillotine. So this is how the first segment of the French history we can we see or we understand that how the things were happening right from the very beginning. If you see the division of the society, and that also with the privileged and unprivileged class, and how people were surviving or struggling to survive. Lots of factors were there: poor production, you can say, the burden of taxes on the common man, the drought, many factors. Ultimately, there was a emergence of middle class who were highly educated, who got inspired with the various philosophers about the government and its system of governance, and their demands. This group of people, they started to demands. Ultimately, when this group of people come with a very huge support by the rest of the people of the French, and they able to turn French from absolute to constitutional monarchy. Afterwards, what happened? The Jacobins slowly they rose in power, and when Jacobin rose in power, they again declared the French as a republic state, and there also we have seen many of the things. But when the administrative system of the French comes in the hand of Jacobins, Jacobins too seems like a despotic or not democratic. Despotic means just not democratic with its system of governance. So this is the first segment of the chapter we have discussed here. So remaining part of the chapter we will discuss in the next video. But the timeline you must go through and try to read out the chapter after watching this video. Thank you very much.